Bartholomewtown.
Welcome into Bartholomewtown. I'm Bill Bartholomew, and guess what? We are definitely in political season, that's for sure. It's something that we've been beginning to highlight some of the candidates, at least in the governor's race and otherwise, and something that I think a lot of people are watching right now is the attorney general's race here in Rhode Island. No doubt it's going to be interesting, and there's going to be a lot of, I think, focus points will be one of the major things that comes out of this race in terms of where the candidates first in the Democrat primary and then in the general want to put the bulk of their efforts with the resources available to the Attorney General's office in Rhode Island. I think he's one of the hot candidates right now, at least in terms of buzz. He's already recently just raised $210,000 in kind of a sweep. And that's Keith Hoffmann, who joins us today on Bartholomewtown. Keith is most recently his role was a senior aide chief of policy in the Rhode Island AG's office with Attorney General Peter Neronha. Keith, thanks so much for your time today.
Bill, thanks so much for having me.
What would you say, just right out of the gate, is what the motivating force that has made you decide to get into politics proper?
Well, I grew up here in Rhode Island, and it was a time when public institutions like the EPA, like our public libraries. I used to go to the public library down the street with my brother and sister growing up, and we could really count on federal institutions like these to support our families and to help them thrive. And I always wanted to go into public service. My parents were both really committed to public service, and I went to college and law school and have really been doing public service work since that time, including most for the last number of years in the Attorney General's office. And we're in this moment where two things are happening. The federal government is unlawfully, unconstitutionally, in many cases, trying to harm Rhode Islanders, harm these institutions that we've relied on for generations under presidents of both parties in the past. Just an example of environmental enforcement, right? If we're going to see environmental enforcement of our, making sure that polluters are held accountable, it's not going to be from the EPA anymore because the president's administration has no interest in doing that. So we're seeing the federal government trying to take actions that will harm Rhode Islanders, trying to cut back on protections in healthcare, right? So this is both through things like cutting Medicaid funding, right? That's going to directly harm our hospitals, our healthcare system in the state that's already under crisis, and through things like, I believe, restricting in the future. They've taken steps to potentially restrict access to reproductive health care and other life-saving health care for Rhode Islanders. I think we need to be prepared to fight that aggressively. And I've been helping to lead that fight. I was helping to lead that fight from the Attorney General's office, and I would continue to do it if I'm elected Attorney General. But the other thing that they're doing is when they're pulling back on things like environmental protection or public safety through, asking our FBI and our other federal agents that are tasked with doing core federal law enforcement functions, when they're doing civil immigration enforcement, what isn't happening in Rhode Island? And what's not happening to the extent that it should be is gun running, is human trafficking enforcement against gun running, enforcement against human trafficking, enforcement against straw purchasing of firearms. The Attorney General's office in Rhode Island has a core public safety function, and we have to be prepared to stand up for victims, to make sure that Rhode Islanders are protected, and that if the federal government isn't prepared to fight for them, that we are out of the Attorney General's office. So that's why I decided to run and why I want to be the next Attorney General of Rhode Island.
It's interesting because right now there are just so many different lanes. And if you think about what our current Attorney General, Peter Neronha, has been involved in, a number of, and I mean literally numbers of lawsuits against the Trump administration. It just seems like it's an endless sea of different specific and general topics that are being eroded. And when I say topics, I mean, it's topical because you can look at it from a broad stroke standpoint. And you can even go all the way out and say, at some level, human rights are being constantly eroded here under this administration. Do you see it as something you would kind of jump into the continuation of the efforts that Attorney General Neronha has made in pursuing litigation against the Trump administration on a number of different fields? Do you see that as a tenet of what you would be looking to do, the work you would be looking to do as AG?
Yeah, I do, Bill. So, as the chief policy to Attorney General Rona, it was kind of like 20% overseeing the legislative work of the office. And we had a wonderful legislative liaison and policy analyst who I worked with to do that. And it was probably 80% working on the big cases that we were working on in the office. So it was April of last year that Attorney General Narone and I were talking about what would happen if there were a second Trump administration. And what we were seeing from, at that time, Project 2025 and the tweets from future administration officials was that if there was a second Trump administration, it could be devastating for Rhode Islanders. And so I was put in charge of planning the fight for if there was a second Trump administration. And there was somebody like me in each ultimately each Democratic Attorney General's office. Obviously, any Attorney General could have participated in this sort of planning, but it was only the Democratic Attorneys General who were so interested. And um, we would meet a few times a week. We draft memos, we draft complaints, because what we were seeing, as I said, was an administration, if it took office, if it took power, that could be really extreme in their actions. After the election, we all know what happened. The senior staff who'd been doing this planning and the attorneys general met in Philadelphia, and I along with an attorney from New York, presented to all the attorneys general about how we would be able to stand up for our states if the sort of actions that we expected came about, and they did. Right after inauguration day, just as an example, they froze all federal funding to the state of Rhode Island, all Medicaid funding, all federal funding, just incredibly reckless, dangerous, and unconstitutional. And we filed a lawsuit in federal court here in Rhode Island. We stopped that illegal action. That injunction that we obtained from the federal court here has remained in place. And unfortunately, we've had to file a number of lawsuits to protect Rhode Islanders' core interests. Again, we don't do this simply because we disagree with the Trump administration on a policy issue. That is not what this is about. This is about core, as you said, Bill, core rights, sometimes human rights, sometimes constitutional rights, sometimes simply following the law, right? I mean, there are certain things the president has the ability to do when elected, and there are certain things that the Congress has the ability to do, like create a budget that the president's supposed to faithfully execute. And when the Trump administration fails to do that, we have to hold them accountable and protect Rhode Islanders' core interests. That's what I would commit to doing if I'm elected Attorney General.
Yeah, there's no doubt that states' attorneys general are one of the front lines right now in resisting, I think that's the correct word, some of the capriciousness of the Trump administration and that which is, at minimum, gray area, if not outright outside of the lines of not only the law, but kind of just the general intent of the Constitution. So it is which is obviously designed by law, but it's a crazy moment. I mean, yesterday I was watching a press conference with the president and Kash Patel, FBI director, and an hour and 4 minutes of just total chaos. And you really wonder, again, it's not really a Republican Democrat thing. It's what's the future of this country intended to be? And it does seem like one of the primary areas where this is going to be decided is obviously in the court system through states' attorneys general. So you're committed to continuing the work that the current attorney general here in Rhode Island, Peter Nerona, has introduced.
I am, and I agree with you, Bill. Some of the actions out of this administration are absolutely astoundingly reckless, dangerous, unlawful. The targeting of political opponents, the attacks against free speech, the attacks against Americans' core rights and values. I really, it's very alarming. Look, I have two kids. They're 5 and 2, and for a while, as I considered whether to run for attorney general, you know, the fact that I had young kids was a reason that I said to myself, look, I don't know if I can do it, if this is the right time for me. And ultimately, my kids were a big part of the reason that I decided to run after talking with my wife and my mom, who lives down the street and helps out with the kids around bedtime and bath time every night. And they encouraged me to run along with Attorney General Arona, because at the end of the day, what kind of country are they going to grow up in? What kind of state are they going to grow up in? And when you see something like this that's happening, what do you have to do as a parent? And I honestly believe that the right thing to do is to show our children, the 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 people in Rhode Island who don't have the ability to fight for themselves, what the right thing to do is. The right thing to do is stand up and fight. The right thing to do is stand up and fight when we can, and I would be committed to doing that when if I'm elected Attorney General.
Here in Rhode Island, one of the major issues that hasn't really gotten a ton of attention on a broad basis, I think if you went outside and asked people, in fact, recent polling I've seen has shown that this issue, while important, isn't a dominant one. That's healthcare. Something that Attorney General Noronha has been really a major player on. Some people have even identified him as a czar of sorts on the issue. There's a lot of different components to this now. Of course, we've got the lingering, looming potential of people's health insurance disappearing or dramatically increasing in terms of their premiums. But more than that, just the ecosystem of healthcare in Rhode Island has been deeply challenged in a number of different ways. Rather than getting to those on a specific basis right now, perhaps in the future we can do a conversation just on healthcare. But your assessment, I say the state of, or I ask the state of healthcare in Rhode Island is, your assessment is?
In crisis.
Yeah.
And should I build off that, Bill?
Please, yeah, please, yep.
So, look, we were in a crisis before the Trump administration came in. It is now far, far more dire. And one of my roles within the office, I helped to build our Public Protection Bureau that does our healthcare and civil rights and environmental protection and consumer protection work, and then became chief policy and senior counsel to Attorney General Arona, where I also focused a lot on healthcare issues. The Attorney General's office has some very important responsibilities in healthcare. One of the really important responsibilities is a regulatory function. We make sure that when hospitals are going to merge or where there's a hospital conversion, that is essentially in the best interests of Rhode Islanders, and that merger is appropriate under the circumstances, and that this allows us to make sure that, for example, where healthcare private equities are trying to come in, healthcare private equity companies are trying to come in and buy hospitals, that Rhode Islanders can be protected. That's what happened with the Prospect takeover of Roger Williams and Fatima hospitals, and that escrow account that has protected those hospitals from really a disaster, the sort of disaster that we saw in Massachusetts with Stewart. It could have happened here. I would be committed to making sure that Rhode Islanders are protected when transactions like that go forward. Rhode Island, the Attorney General's office has a broader mission through the healthcare advocate to ensure access to quality, affordable healthcare for Rhode Islanders. We also have an insurance advocacy role, to make sure that Rhode Islanders have access to adequate health insurance networks and an ability to advocate through the rate review process in that role. And finally, when we have this healthcare mandate to make sure that Rhode Islanders have access to healthcare in this state, I think it's incumbent on the Attorney General's office to advocate for the interests of Rhode Islanders more broadly. And we saw that during this last legislative session, where we helped advocate for more than $40 million for primary health care, because we identified that as a significant need in this state, one that really that we could see because of these other functions within the Attorney General's office. And we successfully advocated for that funding. We're going into a period, as I said earlier, that's going to be really dire. And the reason for that is that the federal government is trying to cut ACA benefits. They're trying to cut access to Medicaid for people. That obviously is problematic on so many levels. But on a really big systems level, it means less revenue in our healthcare system that already doesn't have sufficient revenue.
Yep.
And that could create problems, significant problems for hospitals that are already under a huge amount of stress. I think it's going to be one of the big, important areas, as you identified, Bill, facing the state over the next year, but certainly 5 years, 10 years, and one that I would be committed to continuing to work in and look closely at if I'm elected.
There's a lot of talk. Maybe it's more of a thing I hear on the talk radio side or things like that, but you hear it sometimes, especially among Republicans and anybody who's kind of upset right now. I think the bridge has provoked some of this conversation. We need an inspector general in Rhode Island. All right. So some people say, well, I'm going to run for lieutenant governor and become the inspector general, whatever it is. I've heard some of this chatter. What doesn't seem to connect, or what people don't seem to realize, is that an inspector general without subpoena power is, well, what is it? I mean, it's hardly anything. There's no teeth there. At the same time, a lot of people seem to forget, and certainly AG Nerona has reminded many people in some of his actions and statements, that the Attorney General's office is an independent constitutional office. You're not a part of the administration, whether you're not a part of the governor's office, you're not a part of the General Assembly. So how do you see yourself as an independent agent? And can the AG's office, well, definitely not an inspector general. There's completely different roles there. But nonetheless, you do have subpoena power and you do have oversight ability and capabilities. So how do you see yourself fitting into Rhode Island government for those who are really concerned about oversight right now, be it the bridge or otherwise, that has evoked these feelings?
Sure. So the Attorney General's office is, as you said, an independent constitutional office. I think that's really important. I think that independence is something that Rhode Islanders demand, and you see it actually in most past attorneys general who've been elected here. Most attorneys general who've been elected over the past, say, 30, 40, 50 years are people who either came from the attorney general's office or came from the U.S. attorney's office. Rhode Islanders want to see people who really are committed to the work of law enforcement, broadly speaking, civil, criminal law enforcement, and oversight. And I think that is, that's me. That is something that I've dedicated my career to this, and I would bring an independent eye to the role. On the inspector general front, as you said, the functions are different, right? The attorney general, when we look at a matter, we're looking at it for either a civil enforcement or criminal enforcement purpose. So an inspector general, I think there could be some overlap to that, but I think that often in other jurisdictions, inspectors general just look more broadly at fraud, waste, abuse. They'll issue reports. There may or may not be a civil or criminal follow-on from that. And so I do think it's a little bit of a different role. But I think that you're right, that there's some level of an attorney general is at baseline an accountability agent. An accountability agent. They're supposed to be a person of integrity, a person of independence, and I believe that is me, and I would commit to running that office as the sort of independent agent for the good of the people of the state of Rhode Island, rather than out of allegiance to any other branch of government.
You feel ready to walk into a bridge story, and we're of course talking about the Washington Bridge right now. Do you feel ready to walk into that? And look, I mean, let's be honest about it. The 13 contractors, if that goes to trial, if they don't settle, it's probably going to be after this election, just based on court calendar alone. But I think
Yep.
I think a lot of people are looking at this and they're wondering, is the state really and truly of the belief that they're going to be able to recoup the money from these contractors, that there's no accountability, what's legal accountability from the standpoint of Rhode Island DOT, whatever the case is? Do you feel that you're ready to jump into this particular matter, and that obviously you'd have opportunities to be briefed, of course, and no, there's no question there, but this is something that you see as a major or at least somewhat important part of not necessarily why you're running, but understand that it is something that, at least on a chatter level, Rhode Island is definitely interested in making sure there's oversight and accountability within government and recovery of as much money as possible.
Oh my God. Yes. So first of all, as I experienced this as both a public servant and somebody who's a candidate, and then as a Rhode Islander, I got stuck in bridge traffic in East Providence the other day for like 30 minutes. Just trying to get onto the bridge. There was some rain, and it was like just horrendous. And I think that it's been an incredibly frustrating thing for anybody who uses the Washington Bridge, which is like a lot of people in the state of Rhode Island. And I think that has to inform how we proceed here. Now, the big issue here is nothing new. The attorney general is always balancing different interests of the state. What are the interests at play here? The basic ones are a really significant interest in making sure that the taxpayer is protected when the taxpayer expends funds. And if there is any wrongdoing on behalf of a contract for the state, a core function of the Attorney General's office is to recoup that funding for the taxpayer, protect the public fisc. Core part of the job. Another core part of the job: ensure public transparency where possible. Rhode Islanders absolutely have an interest in knowing what's going on with their government, their infrastructure, right? And so my understanding of how this is proceeding right now, obviously we've got the litigation. Yes, I would absolutely commit to, if that litigation is continuing at the time I took office, continuing that to make sure that Rhode Islanders aren't left holding the bag if somebody screwed up. We're doing work for them. But on the other side of things, on the transparency side, my understanding is that there's a oversight hearing that'll be planned, or hearings that'll be planned with testimony provided under oath. I think that's a good thing. I think that that Rhode Islanders, they saw a report. My understanding is it's one document out of thousands in this litigation file, and those oversight hearings can cast some additional light on what's going on with the Washington Bridge. I think that is a good thing.
Last question here. You've certainly identified your family as a major part of your visual presentation, if you will, literally, in terms of the campaign materials you've put out, also AG Nerona. If you want to speak about the role that both of those, both your family and the Attorney General play in sort of shaping you, but more also, who's your political or legal hero, big picture? Anybody that comes to mind?
Political or legal hero. All right, so I'll take those in order, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that my family, zooming out, is a I hope there's no echo. I'm getting a little echo on my end.
We're
Bill.
good here on our end.
We're good.
Yep.
All right,
Yep.
good. My family is a big part of what motivates me. So my dad had been a doctor who served in the Vietnam War, and when I was 13, he passed away from cancer linked to exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam. And my mom, she had 3 teenagers at the time. She was working full time, and I was living in Portsmouth. And I was a pretty independent kid, but really it was these families and friends around us that came together as a community that helped to finish the job of raising me and my brother and sister. And what I learned from that was that our communities, if we when you get knocked down, they can really be there to help you get back up. And I think that we're going through a time right now when our communities are going to need to really come together to fight together against these big challenges that we see. And so, my family is a part of that. My kids are part of this community. My wife is as well. She's the director of women's dermatology at Brown. I really believe that we all, these big communities, have to come together. Attorney General Arona is somebody who I deeply respect. I've gotten a chance to work closely with him over the last number of years on really a large number of cases and matters, and learned so much from him. I have a huge amount of respect for him, his integrity, his independence, his dedication to the state, and to excellent lawyering on behalf of the state. And I was really deeply honored to earn his endorsement in this race. You asked for a legal hero. I'm thinking you're thinking like somebody from history.
Somebody from history. It
Oh,
could be somebody in your own life, just somebody that you look to as kind of a North Star. If you do, not everyone even has that, but if you have somebody that's kind of like, hey, you know what? I admire this individual for this particular reason.
all right. I'm gonna go with somebody who you might not expect here, but she's in my mind because she's retiring right now. There's an amazing attorney. Her name is Deborah Wolf, and she is a longtime advocate. She's an attorney and an advocate for people who have cancer and who are facing legal challenges. And she has touched so many lives through her work. She was a professor of mine in law school. She actually helped lead me on this path toward public service, along with many others. And you know, one of the things that some folks don't on the other side of the aisle sometimes don't understand is how government can be such a good thing for people
Mm.
that oh, big bad government. Now of course we have to make sure our government agencies are well run, are efficient. That is absolutely something I'm committed to. But government can be a force for good. It is not always a bad thing. And what Deb Wolf taught me was how, for people with cancer, for families of people with cancer, you know, government could be, whether it was through helping them get access to Medicaid or something else, could be such a force for good for them. And I think that that's something that we all ought to remember in this moment when our government and really a way of life in this country that we've had for decades is really under threat in a way that we've never seen before.
Yeah, great answer. I completely agree. Where the opposing side is trying to, when I say that, I mean Republicans, or at least the MAGA version thereof. They're making the argument that our way of life has been under attack, and that is, look, it veers into white replacement theory and all kinds of dangerous spaces. But I think the truth is exactly like you said, that hey, what are we doing here? Don't people, by and large, remember the power of and the brand of our country, our project, and what that stands for? And you've got to fight for it in so many different lanes sometimes. Now more than ever, Keith Hoffmann, he is an attorney, a candidate for attorney general in the Democrat primary. We'll keep an eye on that and how many people end up getting into this thing. A lot of rumor mill right now. Jason Knight, East Bay representative, is the only other announced candidate in that race. As far as I know, I will correct myself if I'm wrong. Thanks so much, Keith. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Bill.